So once again, I would love to welcome all of you on behalf of International Justice Mission and School of Law and Justice, Adamas University. I thank each one of you for joining us on this morning. We have about 400 participants. It's so exciting to see all of you join this morning, which includes judicial officers, lawyers, students, paralegals, as well as professionals from different fields. We are hopeful that more will be joining and engaging this webinar. And also, it is live streamed across social media platforms. Today, we have experts from the field of mental health and psychology who will elucidate different nuances on this subject. Noted academician, Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda will be shedding light, identifying mental health issues for legal professionals. Renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Jairam, will be sharing on overcoming mental health issues, followed by sharing experiences by Advocate Kaushik Gupta of the Honorable High Court at Calcutta and Mrs. Payal Gonerji, Assistant Public Prosecutor. Thereafter, my friends will also be having an exciting round of questions and answers. Please feel free to post your questions during the session in the chat box which is below. All the participants will be awarded e-certificates for this. You just need to fill a simple feedback form at the end of this webinar. So, without any further ado, I would call upon Shalini Newbegin to deliver the welcome address. Shalini is an expert counselor with a Master in Counseling Psychology from the Northwest University, USA. She currently serves as a specialist rehabilitation and social services for International Justice Mission by providing subject matter experts across India. I welcome Shalini to give the welcome address.
A very good morning and a warm welcome to respected Honorable Justice Somin Sen, Judge of the High Court of Calcutta, Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda of Nalsa University of Law, Dr. Jairam, psychiatrist and Joint Director of the Mental Health Foundation, and Dr. Jyotsna Yagli, Dean of the School of Law and Justice, Adamas University, who is also our moderator this morning, and esteemed guests and participants. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for joining despite what I know are very, very busy schedules. Today's webinar, Shedding Stigma on Mental Health Issues, is a joint effort of International Justice Mission, a global organization that helps protect the poor from violence, and Adamas University, the School of Law and Justice, an esteemed institution that seeks to develop not just great lawyers, but great leaders. The purpose of today's webinar is to address the issue of mental health in the legal profession and to facilitate conversations to overcome it. As a mental health professional, I have worked with hundreds of survivors of trauma across shelter homes in Mumbai. In and through my work, I have come across certain behavioral patterns, signs and symptoms that I quickly learned to be red flags of traumatic stress that greatly affects, it's a factor that greatly affects mental health. The stories of victim girls in our shelter homes were usually shrouded by darkness and by shame. Soon though, a reality came to my notice. I had begun showing signs and symptoms of stress myself. Counseling survivors of sex trafficking 3 times a week, I had begun experiencing secondary trauma myself. The stress of this work affected my fellow counselors and other colleagues in the system. Each of us responded differently to the stressors we were facing, whether in the shelter home, whether in the courtrooms, or in our interactions with stakeholders that were crucial to our goals and to our success. No matter who we were affected. Just a few weeks ago, we were shaken up again when a superstar, right, committed suicide. We all asked similar questions. What happened? Why didn't we see this coming? He seemed to have it all together. What went wrong? Stress and mental health issues do not pick sides. The reality remains true today. No one is immune, but not everybody asks for help. As professionals in fields that are determined to right the wrong and to restore justice, the pressure of high ambitions and perfectionism and the pressure to deliver can ultimately be devastating. In a Johns Hopkins study, lawyers rated the highest in the prevalence of depression among 100 other occupations. It is a demanding profession on a number of levels and can take a tremendous toll on even the most balanced and well-adjusted lawyer. The practice of law is rarely as glamorous as we see on television, and we all know that to be true. However, the ill effects of working with highly stressed clients, long working hours, high competition in the field, and the challenge to keep it all together can eventually overwhelm us. I recently saw a comparison. The impaired attorney shares a lot in common with the impaired therapist. They are both unwilling or perhaps unable to acknowledge that they need help. The stigma and shame surrounding mental illness and stress often prevents lawyers from seeking help until it is too late. IJM and Adamas University is here today to begin what we hope is an empowering discourse, ushering in a new season that will allow us to accept the humanness of our professions and to demystify mental health issues. This pandemic has forced us to take a pause, to reprioritize, and to recalibrate. We have been granted a special opportunity to change the unhealthy patterns of the past and create a new reality, not just for ourselves, but for the children, the families, and the broken systems that need our expertise. It is therefore crucial that we seek holistic wellness in our lives, in our homes, and at our workplace by practicing good work-life balance, by maintaining personal and professional boundaries, by practicing time management skills and prioritizing self-care practices. Accessing the right support at the right time will help us become healthier individuals who I am sure will in turn create and change our communities for the better. Congratulations on the webinar this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shalini, for delivering the opening address. We are enlightened by your sharing of experiences as a mental health professional. Now, I have the true privilege and honor of calling upon Honorable Justice Somin Sen to deliver the keynote address. His Lordship is a legal luminary in the true sense. He stood first by securing the highest marks in the LLB examination from the University of Calcutta. He was also adjudged first in the order of merit for individual performance at the 12th All India Moot Court competition, which was held in 1989. He practiced as an advocate in the Honorable High Court at Calcutta for the last 20 years and designated as a senior central government advocate. His Lordship was elevated as Judge of the Honorable High Court at Calcutta on 13th of April 2011 and is also one of the members of the Juvenile Justice Committee of the High Court at Calcutta. As soon as we approached, my Lord has kindly consented to deliver the keynote address in spite of having other engagements. He has also been a constant source of encouragement to all of us, as well as given valuable tips on how to make this webinar more keynote address.
Am I audible?
Yes, my lord.
Am I audible, Saptarshi?
Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord. You're audible.
Thank you, Saptarshi, for your kind words. A very good morning to all the distinguished panelists and participants and viewers. I am extremely thankful to the organizers for inviting me to deliver this keynote address. The topic is extremely relevant and it only shows how thoughtful and passionate the organizers are about this burning issue of mental health, which is extremely important for our survival in this pandemic situation. Ms. Sarkar, in his introductory speech, has beautifully captured the subject. Corona panic has made most of us look helpless and hopeless, with no hope for a better world, a status quo ante, and a bright future. It is shrinking and crowding our minds and thoughts with the worst case scenario. It reminds me of J.K. Rowling, who described Dementors, she said, as get too near a Dementor and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. Corona panic is doing precisely that to all of us. Jobs have become uncertain, future bleak, and grappled with various problems with insecurities, self-doubts, and inadequacies. Young lawyers, professionals, and students are under tremendous stress. Sometimes it distracts us from what truly matters by intrusion of a lot of obsessive paranoia. Lockdown has disrupted our daily rhythm, a weird sense of vacuum. This void can spiral into depression and other mental health related problems if left unattended and unchecked. Corona seems to have engulfed us so badly that we seem to live in constant fear and uncertainty. We have forgotten to laugh, meet friends, go out with families, and dine outside in restaurants. We are as if in a forced house arrest involuntarily. Social distancing, otherwise viewed with disdain, has now become the social mantra for survival. You started feeling your neighbor and close relations as untouchables. Mask has become an indispensable thing in your life. On a lighter vein, I say that sometimes we say that we unmask you. Now we say that we'll put your mask so that you are safe and I am safe. Your dress code, lifestyle, relationship, conduct, everything had changed drastically overnight. Obviously, once a change comes, it has its effects. Whether it is good or bad, better or worse, only time can say. It's not always easy to cope with changes happening rapidly and without prior adequate notice. Adaptability to change takes time. No one really knows for sure what are the exact symptoms and remedies. We are living through a trial and error method. However, should we allow us to easily fall prey to such virus, or should we fight it with courage, caution, and boldness? There cannot be any doubt that sudden change is bound to affect us economically, emotionally, and socially. For a young lawyer aspiring to be a very successful lawyer and earn a name and fame for himself, has suddenly faced with this unprecedented pandemic situation, which may completely shatter his dreams unless he received the required support. A lawyer who is reasonably senior and had moderate practice and earnings may have adapted to the technology and may be more comfortable with the virtual hearings of the courts, as opposed to traditional physical hearings, may have different kinds of challenges. And the senior most lawyer, for whom day one means a physical hearing, is familiar with the physical hearings, may feel completely misfit and out of place in the present system of hearing and scenario. And this for him would be a different kind of mental challenge. It may happen that the young lawyer who wants to be young Turk, who is otherwise very competent, may not be financially and economically secure, or is having his family and parents to maintain, and he would be facing an undaunted task to survive. A lawyer may have taken a loan, car or home as the case may be, and was confident to pay the EMIs as and when it falls due on the basis of what he was earning. His expectation that he would be in a position to repay all these EMIs. He started feeling secured and enjoying possibly the brightest side of life when he was suddenly struck with a thunderstorm of corona. It created fear, anxiety, and depression in his mind. This mental stress would lead to mental illness. Similarly, even a professional with moderate income may face similar stress, considering the fact that, and I assume, with the success in profession, his lifestyle and standard of living has significantly changed. He had to maintain his office, his staff, his establishments for professional purposes, besides meeting his household expenses. The senior most person may have a much larger establishment with much larger exposure, and with the present scenario, his work is likely to get reduced significantly, which would certainly have an effect on his income, as the courts are functioning on reduced strength. Apart from this, as I said, he may face challenges in adapting to the present court practices. In the present economic scenario, the clients may not be in a position or willing to engage a senior lawyer. Now, all these factors have made normal human beings exposed to extraordinary situations and create emotional difficulties such as anxiety, depression, insomnia, loss of appetite, to mention a few. But does it mean that it's the end of the road for all of us, for all of them, or we accept it as a fait accompli? If we think calmly, these kinds of uncertainties are part of life, irrespective of corona, as uncertainties are part of any profession. It may have an aggravated consequence, but it is certainly temporary and not going to long last. And it is not going to last for long, as we are hopeful that the vaccines, which are now under trial by the Oxford University, as also the Pune Institute, would soon yield positive results. Although on a lighter note, I might say that this morning I received a WhatsApp message from one of my friends who said the most common word, the most negative word in use in 2020 is positive. We may have to reverse it. The most used word in 2020 would be positive, and it would remain as positive. As he said that the uncertainties are part of the profession, we need to have the strength and courage to face it. As President Kennedy of the USA has said once, that do not pray for easy lives, pray to be stronger men. A person to be successful in a profession is required to lead a disciplined life and take care of his health, hygiene, and also learn and certainly have to save for bad times. The virus has taught us few good things, namely, I would say, never ignore the environment, be close to Mother Nature, respect your Mother Nature, share bonds with family and friends, avoid social media if you find it distressing, exercise caution to identify false information, listen to music, play indoor games, engage in hobbies, and try relaxation techniques such as meditation and yoga. It gives us an opportunity to rediscover ourselves, to ignite our hidden talents and passions, and cultivate such talents which we have ignored so far for work or for some other reasons. We need to find out channels which can sustain ourselves. We should try to create a different daily routine for ourselves and adapt to emerging changes so that we are not mentally stressed. Even for a lawyer who has been trained for virtual hearings, may however found it easy to sit. It's for even for a lawyer who has not been trained for virtual hearings, may however found it easy and convenient to sit before a computer monitor and participate in online proceedings by shedding off inhibitions and without being too rigid with the requirement and necessity of a physical hearing. Learning to work from home is a novel idea and challenging task for many, and we should prepare ourselves to face such challenges. As we often say that necessity is the mother of invention. It cannot be said that virtual hearing of matters has not yielded desired results. It is true that all kinds of matters are not suitable for virtual hearings, but there are also large number of matters which, with the cooperation of the bar, can be disposed of by virtual hearings, and that's what the courts in India are presently doing, for ensuring that the justice is not denied. In the profession, one may be successful and the other may not. Competition always remains. But that at the end of the day, we should not forget that members of our fraternity, of the legal fraternity, are part of one larger family. Where the seniors are the gurus, they're the pater familiars. A senior counsel is a guru to his chamber juniors, and it is this relationship of the senior, and it is the responsibility of the senior to ensure the well-being of the junior, as much the responsibility of the junior to take care of a senior when the senior is in distress. I always felt that pride and wealth are temporary. What is most important is that we should have empathy, compassion, and kindness for our fellow members and be ready to share our wealth and happiness with the members of the legal fraternity who need them most. Human touch, compassion, and kindness are some essential virtues and elements of life which we have ignored so far and are the need of the hour. In this hour of Corona, kindness and compassion must go viral and embrace all, so that the happiness and joy can bring light and smile in the face of members of the fraternity. It brings a ray of hope for all who are suffering from mental distress. It is a collective responsibility of all, and it should be our pledge to fight the virus together and not to lose the battle meekly. It's for sure that in times of corona, joy is not something that will come to us easily. But we have to find joy and happiness within it, otherwise we'll sink into depression and anxiety. Being calm or learning to stay calm and discovering ways to calm the mind is another helpful strategy to keep oneself mentally happy. We must realize that depression and mental health issues are like getting influenza. You are infected with influenza, and not to be seen as either weakness or embarrassment, which may occur to any one of us for quite a different reasons, and all of them are curable. It is unfortunate that even today we are reluctant to go to counselors to seek his advice. It is still met with prejudices, judgments, and ridicule. Mental health is, as Ms. Sharkar has said, is shrouded in deep-seated stigma. The stigma, discrimination, and social isolation need to be rooted out from society. Fear is inevitable in the present time, but we should not lack the courage to overcome. A member of your fraternity may be infected with corona, but it is not a stigma. It is something which has happened to him, and this is curable. And once he is cured, he should not be treated as an outcast or should be kept in isolation. As I said, that fear is inevitable in the present time, but we should not lack the courage to overcome it. It's important to remember that we fight the disease and not the person. It's a collective social responsibility to ensure that no stigma is attached to a victim of corona, and proper dissemination of informations are required. May I conclude with the prophetic words of Rabindranath Tagore, who had possibly seen the ebb and flow of life more than anybody else. First, I say the few lines in Bengali. Bipode more rokkha karo e nohe mor prarthona, bipode ami na jano kori bhoy. In English, it would mean like this, it would read like this. It is not my prayer that you save me from all perils. I pray that I should not fear when faced with odds. I hope that this discussion will show us ways and means to get out of this mental trauma and anxiety. I wish success to the organizers. I may not be able to stay throughout this discussion, but I will try to join after some time. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Justice Soman Sen, for this enriching us with your vast experience, sharing about legal professionals, as well as during this current time of pandemic. There couldn't have been a better beginning of this webinar. Your Lordship has nicely laid the foundation and scope for today's discussion and ending it in a very positive note. Thank you, my Lord.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, as we speak, we are having about 500 participants joining us in this platform, as well as we have many more who have joined us through our social media, which is going on live. There's been live streaming. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will transition into a technical session. I'm thrilled to hand over the reins of this webinar to none other than Professor Dr. Jyotsna Yagnik. Without her patronage, this webinar wouldn't have been possible. Please allow me to introduce her. Dr. Yagnik is currently the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Dean of the School of Law and Justice of the Adamas University. She was the former principal judge, City Civils Court, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Ma'am has been teaching law for 33 years. She is also the director of the Yagnik Law Academy to coach for judicial exams. She has also been an arbiter and a mediator. At present, ma'am imparts education to trial court judges, trainee IAS, as well as IPS officers and senior executives. I welcome Professor Dr. Josna to the technical session as well as to lead the webinar till its conclusion. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Saptarshi. Very delighted to take over from you. So far, had a very, very vibrant session. We have heard Honorable Mr. Justice Soman Sen, Judge High Court of Calcutta, who was a brilliant student and undoubtedly a brilliant judge, and is a product of 5 years integrated law teaching course, was awarded as the best mooter, and was also always a live debater. These are all I'm repeating. For law students who are online, we have to see the illustrative personality posed before us in form of Honorable Mr. Justice Sen. Ladies and gentlemen, we have also with us my very dear friend, Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda, Dr. Jairam, many law advocates on the line, faculty members of School of Law and Justice, Adamas University, students of School of Law and Justice of Adamas University, Shalini ma'am, Mr. Saptarshi, and all the office bearer of International Justice Mission, and more particularly my colleague, dear friend, Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary, a Pro Vice Chancellor of Adamas University. As we all know, stigmas of mental health issues is quite common. When some views in negative way are being given because of some distinguishing characteristic of some person or some personal trait, it is known as stigma. That is required to be mentioned before this August gathering. If one is physically unwell, people accept it very easily, rather that person gains sympathy. But when someone is mentally ill, someone is mentally unwell, there are lot of stigmas and stereotypes, more particularly negative stereotypes are being attached. We just cannot forget that such negative attitudes, belief, or sometimes disliking of a person who is mentally unwell or who suffers or faces mental issues are getting lot many adverse effects because of this. The stigma is attached to a person, but it results into discrimination. Avoiding a person who is suffering from mental illness is very common. Negative remarks, passing, saying something in a mockery way, assumption of instability of that person, violent behavior to be perceived in advance before even coming into contact with a person who is mentally unwell are all very, very common thing. Today, we are going to discuss on a very, very important area, and that is related to legal professions. We know that in legal profession, there are numerous challenges. Accountability to profession, accountability days, many days, and when you take some session matter, you just burn your night that client was engaged, not getting penalized, so many things. The judge, the colleague lawyer, the lawyer of the opposite side, all these are one way or other way creating lot of stress, disturbances in mind, and your mind is fully occupied with all such things. It is therefore result at times into isolation, self-doubt, shame, lack of confidence, lack of courage to speak, so on and so forth. So today, as I told you, since the legal profession is full of challenges, worries, and uncertainty, it has been thought fit to think over it. We have in our midst a wonderful speaker on the subject, Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda. Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda is, I would humbly say, a well-known, internationally acclaimed speaker on this subject. She has worked a lot. She used to give webinar on depressions or so on and so forth. The mind who comes is Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda. It is very difficult to introduce her. However, ladies and gentlemen, I will try my best to introduce my dear friend, Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda. Professor Dr. Amita Dhanda is a noted academician and also mental health, contributed many research on mental health and disability studies are her special areas, coupled with many other areas where she is working. She is head of the Center for Disability Studies in NALSA. She is an author of 3 very well-known books and is also a guest writer of Kafila, along with few others online news magazine and national dailies. She is regularly training judicial officer, prosecutor, and law faculty. And that is not the matter of today. I had an occasion to invite her at the Gujarat High Court when NALSA has directed State Legal Services Authority to train our PP on the subject of MH and to bring awareness and educate them. Somewhere in the year 2002, 2003, after earthquake, she was our guest there, and she has imparted training to series of batches. Such is a brilliant, extraordinary speaker, thinker, author is our today's guest. He is going to speak with us about the mental health issues related to. I'm more than happy, madam, to welcome you at this August gathering in this webinar. I also express my thanks for the consent you have given, and hearing her is a feast which you all will realize as soon as her speech will be completed. So, madam, wholehearted welcome to you, and may to you. The podium is all yours. Please, madam, proceed. Madam Amita Dhanda.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jyotsna. It's you haven't at all changed as far as your energy, enthusiasm, and your ability to sort of exude warmth across screens also, not just in person. And I am actually here because I can't say no to Jyotsna. We go such a long way back. So much of my practical mental health learning, let's say, or talking about law and mental health has been done in her company. And it's important, I think, to resume contacts, to be with friends, because warmth and friendship is what gets you to go through very, very difficult times. I also wanted to thank the Indian Justice Mission and Saptarishi. I apologize. He has been asking me to be sending in my PowerPoint, but somehow I couldn't put together a PowerPoint. I'm hoping that, Saptarishi, I can make some powerful points and we can proceed from there. Okay, so we're talking in terms of stigma of mental health, and you know exactly how we can be making moves for addressing it. Also, we're talking about the whole issue of mental health and its relevance or its for legal professionals. One of the running themes which has come from all the speakers this morning is this factor of what as such, there are 2 things here. I think Jyotsna gave that definition of stigma, but I think even Shalini, when she made her presentation, and the judge, when he spoke, did speak about stigma being ascending, like putting somebody standing apart, that you are something distinct, different. You are, because of the fact that you are not like everyone else, hence you, like you stand out, and people feel that they can look askance at you. They can say, oh, this person, sort of thing. And that's the way in which we have for very, very long looked at issues of illness and health. The counter to that, of course, is, and that's exactly where, and I think it's very appropriate that we are speaking in terms of law and mental health, or the relevance of mental health for legal professionals, that you're finding that suddenly this condition or this business of being, like you are distinctive, or you are eccentric, or you are somebody who is apart, you find that that apartness, that eccentricity, that business of you being somebody different is no longer the way in which you are looking at issues of mental health, because all of us suddenly are finding that we are as vulnerable as the other. It could be for whatever reasons. It could be the isolation of the home. It could be sudden economic insecurity. It could be the fact that, like it's too many people in one place. It could be that you're the only one in your space. All of these factors suddenly somewhere are making us all vulnerable. When Shalini spoke about the fact that, like because you were on a continuous basis interacting with distress, that distress had an impact on you. You who believe that, no, I mean, like, because you're a mental health professional, you are somebody specially equipped to deal with these issues, hence non-vulnerable or invulnerable. And you suddenly find that, no, you are not. And I think the same holds good for each one of us. We've been having this constant conversation in my law school between, students and teachers, and a lot of students sharing their own distress that they are facing by reason of the uncertainty before them, the inaccessibility of, say, internet, missing a class, or not being able to do an exam. And teachers are saying that, listen, we are suddenly kind of having to teach in a medium we are not familiar with. We are handling our housework and our professional work in the same sort of space. And the fact that suddenly maybe somebody in the home is not well, or you are anxious about, you suddenly develop a cough or a fever and you're constantly anxious. Are you okay? Are you not okay? I'm wanting to put this first point to you, that what we are suddenly finding, and it's amongst the most, I think, potent way of discounting the stigma of mental illness, not the stigma of mental health, but the stigma of mental illness, by recognizing the fact that this so-called, that there are certain distinct people who become mentally ill, and there are the rest of us who are normal and well, is really a myth. That this vulnerability exists in all of us, possibly because of, and that vulnerability exists in all of us is the first kind of thing which the pandemic has confronted all of us with it. And this, of course, this confrontation can be seen as a kind of, you could say, something to worry about is one way of looking at it. What I would put to you, and I think that's what is informing the organizers in putting together this webinar, is to demonstrate that this condition which we thought was a unique condition and happened to only a few is actually a very inextricable part of being human. If you are human, there would be times at which you will be frail, you'll be vulnerable. And if you are vulnerable, that experience of your own vulnerability hopefully gets you to develop that empathy for all others who could be similarly vulnerable. And I'm hoping that this experience of our own vulnerability doesn't only stop with the pandemic, with these periods of isolations and lockout, but is something which gets hardwired into us. We kind of internalize it, and that becomes a basis for how we look at questions of law and mental health in times to come to, and I would somewhere say to see a crisis as an opportunity, to see this as a way of us deepening our own human wells of sympathy and care, of being able to sort of be kinder people. And I think kindness is amongst one of those human emotions, which the more you give of it and the more you receive of it, we all are sort of living in an environment which has a kind of, what should I say? It provides us with an energy of being able to fight the uncertainties of life. Having made that first very fundamental generic point on which I would somewhere want to build in the rest of my presentation, I also want to kind of connect this with systemic issues which have been in the interconnection between law and mental health. In the way in which the law has constructed the status of the person with mental illness has been basically a discriminating status, a discriminatory status, a stigmatized status. That is, if you are recognized, quote unquote, as a person of unsound mind in law, we have a whole range of disqualifications that we extend to that individual. And we were able to extend those disqualifications without turning a hair or without being overly troubled by it, because we always thought that person of unsound mind as somebody who was an aberration, as somebody who was like different from us. Suddenly now you find that it's not so. And if anything that you're feeling, any distress that you're feeling that gets exacerbated, it gets increases, it aggravates, you could well be joining that particular category. But what we also find in the law that most of, or at least large number of disqualifications, somewhere or the other, are not only with, like say Shalini coming up with a diagnosis, it also requires that with the moment before your civil rights are denied, that diagnosis is then confirmed by a competent court. And a large part of the trainings that I had done with Jyotsna was to bring home to, like judges and lawyers, that there are these two distinct kind of things. When the mental health professional finds a diagnosis, the mental health professional is providing that diagnosis as a way of extending assistance. When that same diagnosis comes into law, we are largely diagnosing to exclude, to say this is what you can't be doing. And we could carry, or you could sort of practice that exclusion, because that exclusionary status that we gave to the person with mental illness, we did not really question it. So I am putting the second point to you, that it's important somewhere now to think, how lightly were you using that power, whether, as a lawyer or as a judge? And it's important somewhere for, or even as a legal academician, that, like that business of incapable by reason of unsoundness of mind. Whether you do it in your contract law, or you do it in the marriage statutes, or you do it in property, it is sort of all pervasive in law. And we did not really turn a hair. We just sort of like in a very mechanical manner, recounted that disqualification and just moved on to the next section or the next issue that we were discussing. I would somewhere want you to now reflect more deeply on this particular issue and see, is this connection as simple and easy as it has been? Or is the new convention, the rights of people with disabilities, which is talking in terms of capacity of all people, that everybody, whether it's a person with psychosocial disability or any other disability, you can't take away from that individual the power to be regulating their own lives. You can support them in doing that, but you should not exclude them. And I think this particular connection between mental health and law is of special relevance to legal professionals. And hence, if this pandemic is kind of brought us face to face, right in the mirror with the whole issue of mental health, then I think that learning we should take into our own, our practice of the law, it's a kind of a learning which has been given to all of us. It's a training which life has provided to all of us. So I would say that we shouldn't let it go by. And in the moment that empathy becomes an integral part of our own practice and functioning, it is in a very, very major way going to be contributing to destigmatizing of the condition. My third point here is that, very often the judge, of course, spoke about mental health and mental illness in very analogous terms as we think of physical health and physical illness. There are, of course, certain kinds of physical illnesses. COVID-19 itself is a very live example, wherein because of the fact of its infectiousness, because of the fact that you can transmit it to other people, you might, if you are having a particular kind of physical illness, it was, say, leprosy at one point of time, it was tuberculosis at another point of time, it was AIDS at another point of time. So you have, at certain points of time, these kinds of diagnosis of physical illness, which also cause for the people who are suffering from those illnesses to be stigmatized. But what has also happened for physical illnesses is that as vaccines were formed or as immunities were built, people were, like that. It's not like it totally shed the stigma, but it kind of minimized the stigma. On the other hand, when it came to mental illness, so it's like that business of stigmatization is even more problematic, because you also believe that this particular person cannot really make judgments of illness and health themselves. And you have a whole coercive regime being put into the law and making it that much the more difficult to be fighting the stigma of that condition. That's one dimension. The other is, and that's the more important one, and especially now, if you look at all the etiologies, all the causes that the judge spelled out when he was speaking in terms of COVID-19. He was talking in terms of economic insecurity. He was talking in terms of social disconnection. He was talking in terms of your own vulnerabilities to handle your life problems. You were not talking in terms of some kind of a virus in your body. You were talking in terms of your social circumstances and how those social circumstances can make you psychologically and otherwise vulnerable. That insight that we have got in relation to mental health and illness in this pandemic, if we extend it and extrapolate it to times before and hopefully after the pandemic, we're going to find that the same vulnerabilities are what people who are diagnosed with illness are facing up with, which necessarily means that the sort of remedies that we devise or the kinds of help that we provide cannot be limited to ingesting a pill. It needs to be looking at how do we sort of structure our society in a more inclusive and a non-discriminatory manner? How do we extend respect and dignity to each other? How do we recognize that people have, different ways of living in the world and different kinds of preferences and different kinds of predilections? How do we sort of provide space for that plurality? The more and more we do of that, the more and more do we make a world which is conducive to mental health. For us as law people, this other dimension is that very often these structural inequities and inequalities need to be questioned and challenged. And this fight for justice, to be able to say that what was done to me, be it by a husband or an employer or the state, doesn't matter who, was not the correct thing to do. And somebody saying that, yes, you were wrongly treated is a very, very major, you could say, major, it kind of enhances your mental health in a major kind of a way. And in this enhancement of mental health, we as legal professionals play a major role. So we haven't to see mental health as something which is only the concern of psychologists and psychiatrists and, so psychiatric nurses and social workers. It is everybody's concern. And everyone who is kind of working towards making a fairer world is looking at, structural inequities and inequalities in a manner that these need to be constantly challenged. It's not like we can overnight change them, but if we constantly keep challenging them and every time say that something which is not right, to that extent, we contribute towards making a more conducive mental health world. The moment we do that for the rest of the world, we do it for each other. we sort of are, in a way, you could say, creating an environment which allows everybody to flourish. And this particular contribution, I mean, a lot of people would say that, it's not necessary that law or following of law necessarily results in justice. But that there is an intimate connection between law and justice, and the manner in which the sort of interpretations that we put forth, the perspective with which we look at anybody's iniquity or discrimination, the sort of hope that we give to people who are faced up with discrimination, all of these contribute not just to, because it's a fact, I mean, all of us can vouch for it, that when you are assisting someone who is in distress, you don't just assist that person, you also assist yourself. Because each person's fight for against injustice and for justice that we aid that individual and we aid ourselves. We sort of feel there is meaning to our being in this world. I mean, then of course, at this point of time, because the judge spoke about it great length, it was also about how do you do it. Like within these times of physical inaccessibility, all of us are not as adept with handling the virtual space. But I somewhere do think that the more important thing is that you have to be convinced that, yes, I do something which only I can do. As a legal professional, only I can do it. If people are, any set of people, be it migrant workers, be it the manner in which we are regulating, the lockdown, or the other kinds of, let's say, deprivations of freedom, how should that regulation be happening? Should the state be absolutely without any questioning, or should we make every exercise of power as something which is a self-reflective exercise, both by the person who's exercising the power as well as by the people who are receiving, decisions under that power? As law people, this is the special power given to us. We should not kind of, dismiss it off. We are the only set of people who can look at a rule and regulation and say, yes, this is one way in which you can read the rule. But if I have to look at this rule in consonance with the rights which the Constitution of the country gives, then this is the manner in which it should be fine-tuned. And it's because we set up this constant dialogue between, say, legislators and us as citizens, between judges and our clients, that there is no one perspective and one way of looking at things which has to be given this absolute authority. And this way of seeing things from multiple angles is the special talent of legal professionals. We should not diminish our talent. We should not in any way say that, oh my God, because of the fact that we have this special ability to be able to help so many other people, help them in advancing their mental health, and in helping them advance their mental health, we are also in some manner protecting our own mental health. That, I would say, for me, is the biggest kind of relevance that subsists between questions of law and mental health. We have, by the law, been required to determine who is or who is not a person of unsound mind. These are questions which will stay with us beyond the pandemic. But how we will address this question after our own life experience of seeing that distress and what it does to you is not something which happens only to certain kinds of people because they have some particular wiring of their mind. It is something to which all humans are vulnerable. And if all humans are vulnerable to it, then people with mental illness and health are not some unique people. They are just like us. And if that empathy goes into how we practice the law, or how we sort of look at the entitlements of people who are in that transient phase going through it, then I do think we are to that extent becoming or promoting the whole realm of mental health. And in the same sort of manner, I would say that mental health questions are not physical biology questions. They are as much social structure questions. And how much of a fair society we contribute towards. The more we fight for it, the more we agitate for it, and the more we contribute towards it, we are as legal professionals both challenging the stigma of mental illness. We are also making for a more conducive environment for everybody's mental health to flourish. Thank you so very much. I'm done, Josna.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Professor Dr. Dhanda, Nalsa University. We have heard the champion of implementer of the RTE Act, having identified the area of mental professional, discuss how to overcome it. Now, Dr. Jay Ranjanam, psychiatric, Joint Director, MHF, in our another as our another worthy speaker. He is MD from Nimhans, Bangalore, MRC Psych from UK, and CCST in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. With accreditation MH Foundation, which focuses on providing adults with nuances of MH to wider community, removing stigmas of mental illnesses.
It seems the link to Dr. Yagnik is lost. The next speaker may speak, please.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
I'm sorry,
Yes,
there is
yes,
some
very.
sort of disconnection.
Right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I think it's a privilege, and I would like to thank IJM and Adamas University for asking me to join in this webinar. It was a privilege to hear Professor Dhanda, whom all of us have read about what she has written, and also to hear her in person, really. This is one of the advantages of the pandemic, that you get to hear people sitting in your living room. Now, I have a PowerPoint presentation, but before that, I want to preface my presentation by saying a couple of things. Now, mental health and law, it's a huge domain, and some of the foundations, some of the themes have already been mentioned by Madam Shalini, Professor Dhanda, and as you are aware, as all lawyers and mental health professionals are aware, that it is a vast topic. It's not an easy relationship, really, between mental health and law. Often psychiatrists, mental health professionals are in conflict with law for a variety of reasons, and which possibly we will not be covering today. But however, my topic today is really circumscribed, and I would like to only talk about how we negotiate our minds in times of corona, especially keeping the legal profession in view. So I'm not going to talk about diagnosis, conflict with law, the human rights perspective, or, there's a vast array of questions which has already come in. We can go into that in discussion, but I think I will be restricting myself to a far more circumscribed topic of, the interface of the pandemic, a legal professional, and mental health. So I will just try and share my screen, hopefully. Right, can all of you see my screen? It's negotiating our minds in times of corona. Can all of you see this?
No, not yet.
Zoe, can you please share my screen?
Yeah.
Or share the presentation, then it would be easier.
Yes, now it's visible. First slide. Yeah.
So Zoe, you are going to.
Joanna's doing it.
Okay. So someone else would be doing it. Okay. Right. So, I just wanted to talk about this theme really, negotiating our minds in times of corona. We can have some discussion about some of the other questions and cross-cutting themes. Now, can I have the next slide, please? We have been talking about the determinants of mental health and what influence this pandemic has had on our mental health. We heard Lordship Sen talk about it. Shalini ma'am also referred to the effect of pandemic and also the influence of working with survivors of sexual abuse, trafficking, how it influences our own minds. She also referred to it. So as we know, there are many determinants of mental health. So there are social determinants, there are psychological determinants, and there are biological determinants. And none of these determinants are hermetically sealed, so they overlap with each other. And at present, if we examine our lives, what determines my mental health is my life circumstances, how privileged I am or how privileged I am not, what kind of circumstances we are living in, what kind of jobs we are doing. These are some of the parameters, some of the many parameters which decides our mental health. And I have just listed, 2 or 3 possibly of the top of my list, but there are numerous determinants which impinge, interact with each other to decide how each of us are feeling at any given point of time. Now, if you, so already it's a very complex, finely tuned, delicate balance which we all have to maintain our sanity and to maintain our mental health. If you take into account what we know as a black swan event, which is, one of the famous writers and philosophers, or I call him a philosopher, but, he's a very prolific writer. Nicholas Taleb mentions something as a black swan event. Black swan events are unpredictable events which no one can foresee, and they are rarest of rare phenomena. So what could be the impact of a black swan event like a pandemic on our mental health, when we know that our mental health is a very delicately balanced system which can be quite fragile? Can I have the next slide, please? Right. Now, if you think about the legal profession, what is the popular image of a legal professional? When I think of a lawyer, I think of him as a pursuer of justice, a pursuer of truth, as someone who is a workaholic, as someone who is sharp-witted, someone who is quick on thinking in his feet, and is unaffected by the realities of the world around him, and just pursuing what he or she intends to. So there is this rather Teflon coated image of lawyers who are invincible. And if you see the popular media, the popular culture, representations of lawyers in many of the series which we watch, in many of the talk shows which we see every day on our news media, you would see that they are sure-footed, quick on thinking, robust, and somehow appear invincible. So I call this the harm caused by Harvey Specter. If some of you do watch Suits, you would know what I'm referring to. But Harvey Specter is a character in one of the most popular legal series, where he appears to be absolutely what we know as a coolest person around, who is unaffected by emotions, really. But that is the popular image. But we know that all of us ultimately are human beings who are affected by what is happening around us. So the reality is quite different. Can I have the next slide, please? So what is the reality of a lawyer's life? What is the reality of a legal professional? See, the nature of your work necessitates deep involvement in cases. And day in, day out, you hear narratives of rape, abuse, marginalization, violence, injury, so on and so forth. And you really cannot defocus and not listen.
Hello?
Hello? Yes, am I being audible or?
Yeah, you're audible. Please continue.
Okay, yeah. So if you think of a daily working life of a lawyer, of a legal professional, if you think what you listened to over a period of 10, 25, 30 years of your working career, you would realize that you see the worst aspects of human behavior. You have to delve deep into it. You have to delve with marginalization, discrimination, standing up for people who do not have rights. And it definitely affects all of us, those who are in the profession. And again, legal professionals are no exception. In fact, I was doing a couple of searches before I was preparing for my presentation. And there is, in fact, a lot written about the concept which is known as vicarious trauma and legal professionals, which I will refer to in a minute. So can I have the next slide, please? So ultimately, how does it affect the legal professionals? Through your work, you would live through the trauma which others are narrating to you. So although you yourself were not the victim of trauma, you are suffering from what we know as a vicarious trauma, because you are reliving the life of the client who has come to you. You have to enter into that space, which leads to this concept called vicarious trauma. This often leads to burnout. This also leads to what we know as a countertransferent in psychological terms, where you relate your current experiences with your past relationships, with your past experiences from your childhood, from your growing up years, and they all get merged into your mind. And often what happens is that there are, as we all know, in all systems, and there are, there's no point in just saying that the Indian system fails, but when I have spoken to my colleagues outside our country, there are enormous number of systemic failures in delivery of justice. And somehow many of the lawyers I speak to, they also start mirroring or feeling that somehow they are also failing the person who has come to them, although it is not their personal failure. So often it becomes difficult to separate the individual and the system. And this definitely affects the morale and the spirit of the person who is helping or working with the client. Can I have the next slide, please? So essentially what happens is that in the legal profession, also in the mental health profession, our worldview is built on the narrative we hear about suffering of others, which somehow seeps into our psyche. And we also start feeling being pulled down. So the question is, most of you, all of you who are in the legal profession are more vulnerable to be affected by what you hear and what you see. So then the question is, how do you look after yourself? In a context where we have this pandemic, so these are very, very unprecedented times, I think it is a cliche, but it is absolutely true to say that these are unprecedented times. None of us knew that we would ever have to face a situation like this. So, we really can't Google our responses. I recently saw a young 13-year-old girl who Googled, how do you deal with mom and dad fighting? And apparently she came up with a lot of responses. But we really can't Google situations such as this because we were completely unprepared. There's no manual which has ever prepared us for facing a situation like this. So therefore, we are thinking on our feet. We are having to look after ourselves. And the question is, how do you look after yourself in these times? Again, about 15 days ago, a girl I have been seeing for many, many years, I'll just tell you briefly about her. She's a 26-year-old girl whom I have been seeing for about on and off for last about 7 or 8 years. She has had her education mostly outside this country. She left the country after the age of 18 for her graduate studies. She's academically incredibly bright, coming from a very conservative family where she did excel in her studies, and then but coming from a very, very emotionally abusive background. So in fact, her leaving home was a form of escape. Now, unfortunately, her PhD offers, which she has got through the Wellcome Trust in UK, has been scuppered because the entire money which the Wellcome Trust was paying to these couple of universities in UK has been diverted towards the National Health Service. And there are many other logistical reasons why she cannot reapply this year, and it has to wait for the next year. So, so she's now again stuck at home after many years, where her parents are completely dismissive of her achievement. They believe that, all the very, very typical, stereotypical patriarchal attitude where she's being forced to get into a marriage which her heart is not into it. And she was narrating her story to me, and she asked me, given everything, is it okay to feel crappy? Can I have the next slide, please? So she told me about what she was facing, and she asked me this question. And I said, absolutely, because it is absolutely okay to feel crappy and feel miserable about what is happening. And I think that is what we all need to say to ourselves when we are feeling sad and low. We don't need to be like Harvey Specter. We don't need a Teflon coating all over our body so that we don't feel anything. It is useful to have a Teflon coating. It is useful to be a bit like Harvey Specter so that we don't crumble and decompensate, but we keep on fighting. But there are times when it is absolutely all right to say that we are not managing well. And I think there has been references to this in the previous presentations. Justice Sen talked about that. Ma'am Shalini referred to it, because we really cannot divorce ourselves from our feelings and continue to appear as if we are okay. My other point, which I have just mentioned, that all of you, those who are working in the legal profession, are exposed to the, aspects of humanity which are not good. I always say that working in a maybe a 5-star hotel, or working in a theme park, or working in Disney, the ambience or the environment of working where you see a lot of happy people, relaxed people, is very different from being a legal professional, or working in police, or working in fire services, or working in health services, because we are affected by our environment. So given everything, given the environment now, I think we must allow ourselves to say that yes, we are not coping well and we are feeling sad. Can I have the next slide, please? One of the, I think the WHO chief, I find his, I find his name is, I can't remember his name exactly now, but he mentioned something which is very important, which resonated with me. He said that we are not only fighting a pandemic, but we are also fighting a infodemic. The amount of information which is coming through to us through the different forms of media, through WhatsApp, from television channels, from social media, newspapers, is really mind-boggling and confusing. And I heard this new term a couple of days ago, which is called doom scrolling. Apparently people are just listening to or scrolling the negative news and looking after one bad news after other on the internet. And apparently this phenomena is called doom scrolling, where you are looking out only for bad news. So often what is happening is that we are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of bad news which is coming. Every day the rates are rising. We are reading about shortages of healthcare facility. We are seeing images, heartbreaking images of the migrants walking miles after miles with their children in tow. And really we cannot, again, as I said, make ourselves immune to whatever is happening around us. But I think that if some of us are being affected by this daily dose of bad news, it may be possible to screen the media and not interact too much with it, and only do it on a very, very periodic basis, maybe once a day for 15 or 20 minutes, just to keep abreast of what is happening. So one of the ways we can look after ourselves is definitely to curtail the amount of news which we are watching, and restrict our kind of hunger to seek more and more information, which may not be that useful. The other aspect of what each of us are facing is that we are very uncertain about what is going to happen, and we all know that when we are passing through difficult times, it is the uncertainty which troubles us more. So if I was told that, I haven't fared well in my final semester exams and my results are being reviewed and I will find out in 15 days, I will be a lot more anxious and restless than when I'm told that the results are negative and you won't pass. If I hear bad news, I will come to terms with it. I will process my thoughts. I will accept it. There would be natural human reaction of feeling sad, angry, upset, but I will come to terms with it because I know the final outcome and I have to deal with it. But there are circumstances such as this when we are uncertain about a lot of things. When is going to end? How are we going to tackle this? Am I going to be infected if I go out? How much distance should I keep? How many times I should wash my hands? Can I have the next slide, please? So therefore, there is this beast called uncertainty, which is troubling us more. If we knew that for certain that these are the measures which we have to take, and these are the measures which will keep us protected, these are the timeline of this whole scale of things, and we would be all right after that, then a lot would be easier for us. But if you speak to the students, if you speak to the professionals, we don't know when the court is going to come back to its usual form. We don't know when the exams are going to be held. We don't know how long we have to manage working from home and work for home. We are doing double duty now. Most of us are having to do more at home. So when will this end? We don't know. So how do you tame the beast called uncertainty? Can I have the next slide, please? There are many measures, there are many guidelines, there are many articles which are very helpful, which we can use to reduce our own anxiety levels and master the situation. But personally, I will give you a couple of very personal tips rather than very broad generalized things. I have found that naming the emotion is very important. So when I'm all mixed up, confused and feeling a lot of things, I try to break down my own anxiety problems, worries, and try and name that I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling panicky. And then I try and segregate those thoughts, see what is causing them, and try and deal with it on a then and there basis. And this exercise actually gives me a sense of mastery over my own anxiety. So I try and name the thoughts I have. I try and name the emotions I have, and I try and break it down into finer points and try to see what is causing them. Can anything be done about it? So, can I have the next slide, please? One of the best ways, if we are feeling overwhelmed, apart from naming the emotion, is very simple, really. We need to talk, we need to ask, we need to share, and we need to reach out. So I will talk to my colleague, I will talk to my friends that this is how I'm feeling, how are you doing? And it can be anyone, a wise friend, a mentor, a teacher you like, a trusted family member, anyone really. So sharing and reaching out, I think, does a lot to soothe our frayed nerves. The other part, which I feel is very important, is also to look out for others whom you feel might be in a vulnerable position, because we all can give support, however weak and vulnerable we are feeling at the moment, and that gives us a sense of purpose. If each of us call an elderly relative once a week, call a friend who we know is not coping well, call my friend's mother who I know is living alone with a domestic help, and just kind of give some form of verbal, emotional, or practical support, that gives us a lot of meaning to what we are doing, and that also helps us in self-care, because then we are able to reach out and feel that we do still have some utility in these very, very difficult times. Can I just have the next slide? The next slide is actually, it can be shared with anyone. So there are many forms of self-care, which I'm not going to read out all of them, but there are, again, physical, emotional, social, spiritual forms of self-care, which each of us have to be mindful about. We can try a variety of things, a combination of things. We can try out new things. But I must stress on a couple of points. One is maintaining a very clear schedule to the day. What has happened during these pandemic and working from home is that our schedules have got completely wavered. So therefore, what personally I have found it useful is to maintain a particular schedule to the day. So I do get up when I usually get up. I do go to bed when I usually go to sleep. I do work. I do some physical exercise few times a week when I used to do it. So maintaining the same structure of the day is very important. Having some form of physical exercise, I cannot overemphasize. I think it is very, very important. And what we know in very cliched terms, really, that healthy lifestyles is more needed during these times. So I think we have to be mindful of maintaining very regular habits. Otherwise, it will cause an added stress. Can I have the next slide, please? I think most of us who are working professionals or students have been troubled by this idea that we are just sitting at home and we are not being productive. So I think we need to again figure out whether we are feeling unproductive or whether we are being unproductive. Being at home, reaching out to my friends, looking after myself, developing a new skill may not be very productive in the conventional sense, but for our individual growth, that is being productive. Families bonding together because of the lockdown is a productive move. We may not be professionally that productive, but while at home, when we do not have a lot of work, investing in our social relationship, enhancing our social investment is also being productive. So I think we need to be mindful that there is a difference between feeling unproductive and being unproductive. And during these times of lockdown, where there is opportunities for work is less, we can increase our social investment, which is a very, very important, parameter in long-term happiness. One of the key determinants of happiness in old age is known as what we know as a social capital. So it's not only financial capital, but it is also social capital. So therefore, during these times, we actually need to invest in social capitals a lot more, given the circumstances we are in. I read about these news where citizens have come forward, formed groups, and reached out to people all across the country. A colleague I work with, her brother, he is a legal lawyer. They got 178 migrants back home from, I think they are students of one particular law school. I don't know exactly which, but it came out in the papers. And you hear stories where, real heroes have come out and done absolutely amazing acts of kindness, which we never thought they possibly wouldn't have done it unless we were going through such difficult times. So therefore, investing in social relationship, I think, is an opportunity. And Professor Dhanda also mentioned about it when she mentioned her points about being kind, because this is a time when we can reflect. This is a time when we have more time on our hands and we can become a kinder society, because this is an opportunity I personally feel which we cannot let go. Slowing down our pace and doing more things where we would be more valued as human beings, I think, is an opportunity which this pandemic has provided for us. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, again, this is a slide which, I don't want to read out the entire thing, but how do we make connection with each other? How do we contribute in a number of ways to the environment, to the social group, to my friends, to charity, and how we can control our own emotions. This is just a slide which I think summarizes all of it, and if it can be shared really, so, but I'm not going to read out. Can I have the next slide, please? See, the other very, very important part I want to again come back and address is how do we tame this beast of uncertainty? We do not know a lot of things. What is going to happen? Those are not in our control. What I again personally feel, that if we break down our anxieties into points which are related to things which we can control and things which we cannot control, there are certain things which we can do which can help us to control our day-to-day living, our immediate future safe. So for that, we have to stay in the moment rather than obsessing about far too much in the future. So we can tell ourselves that at this moment we are safe, at this moment we have got a roof over our head, at this moment we have enough stocked in our fridge or food or in my kitchen where I can get by for next 5 to 7 days. And I will stay in the present and deal with it and fight the battle as it comes. Because if we look too much into the future, we may not have all the answers. We may not have all the answers. So, if any of us are feeling far too anxious, overwhelmed by the prospects of future, my request to them is, try and bring your mind back to the present.
Sir, can I request you to conclude in 2 minutes, next 2 minutes?
Yeah. So I think that's my last. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm not going to go details about preventing vicarious trauma, but I think we all know, and in training schools, and I think peer supervision is very, very important in preventing vicarious trauma, which I had referred to earlier. And can I have the last slide, please? So I think we need to be socially and more emotionally connected. And what I want all of us to remember, that this too will pass, and we will overcome this soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jairam Ranjan Ram, for your valuable tips. How do you tame the beast called uncertainty is a very remarkable thing. List your stresses is another. So there are so many tips which we got, Had the time been not constrained, we would have enjoyed hearing you endlessly. It's indeed a great thought process which you have done and which you have communicated to all of us, like Professor Dr. Amita. And now, I would request learned advocate Mr. Kaushik Gupta, Senior Advocate, High Court of Calcutta, a human rights activist who is involved in working for gender, who is also working and providing legal support to the survivor of human trafficking and doing an excellent job. His contribution is human. Such a wonderful learned advocate, Mr. Kaushik Gupta, is amongst us. I humbly request him to share his experience. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. At the very outset, I must clarify that I am not a designated senior advocate. So, because there is a definition of a senior advocate under the Advocates Act, I do not fall in that category. Secondly, I do not only work in the field of gender, I also work in the field of sexuality. Now, with regard to my experience or my understanding with regard to the mental health issues, we have heard Justice Sen, we have heard Dr. Ram and other distinguished speakers. I would like to make a few very small points. All of us understand very clearly that there is a stigma around the issue of mental health. Now, where does this stigma arise from? This stigma arises from within us. Let us take a look at ourselves, the language that we use. Even during our friendly banters, we'll say, "Are you insane?" in a very casual manner. We do not even realize that by saying that, we are perpetrating a stigma. We are re-establishing a stigma. Let us be careful about the words, the language that we use. In the professional field, as has been stated by Justice Sen and other speakers, there is a huge pressure. And obviously, that pressure somewhere affects all our mental health. The learned speakers, the respected dignitaries have told us, shared with us about how we can cope with that mechanism, how we can deal with it, what we should do, what we should not do. However, what was bothering me is this. The question that pops in my mind is, if I, let us say, make an online payment for a product and the product do not get delivered to me, or a substandard product gets delivered to me, what will I do? I'll call up the customer care, I'll lodge my complaint. If necessary, I'll go to the consumer court. However, very interestingly, we do not do the same when we pay our taxes. We do not question our state, the government that is supposed to govern us and rule us. We need to start questioning the state and the government and ask them, what has the government done till date with regard to mental health of its citizens? It is not merely the responsibility of the citizens to look after themselves. We are paying tax to the government, and it is also the responsibility of the government to prioritize the health of citizens. I was looking at a report of 2019, and it said that the WHO prescribed norm is that there should be at least one doctor for every 1,000 citizens. However, in India, there is one doctor for every 1,445 individuals. So we are far below the WHO guideline. As legal professionals, and I understand there are a lot of law students, legal professionals listening to this, it is our responsibility to make the government accountable to ensure protection of all our mental health. We have the tool of RTIs. We have the possibility and ability to file writ petitions in different courts of law, ask questions to the government why they are not taking adequate steps, in spite of us paying sufficient tax at every level. And I do not mean income tax only. If you go to a restaurant, you are paying tax. If you buy anything, you are paying tax. Why is the government not taking adequate steps for protecting the mental health of its citizens? The entire issue should not be left in the hands of the citizens and how they protect themselves and how they secure themselves. I know I have very short time and there are other speakers after me, and I'll end only by reminding everyone that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. If we are not eternally vigilant, if the entire responsibility is thrust upon the citizens and they have to be self-sufficient, then why do we need to pay taxes to the government? This is the question we need to ask ourselves. It is a question that we need to ask our governments, and it is, I repeat, it is not just our responsibility to stay well, stay safe. It is the government's responsibility to keep us well, keep us safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Rightly said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Very impressively said, in a brief but beautifully shared his experience. We have in our midst Ms. Payal Ghosh, another learned advocate, an assistant public prosecutor, and who has served as prosecutor in Hooghly and Howrah district, at present at Sialda South 24 Parganas, formerly in charge of Director of Prosecutor Government of West Bengal, who has conducted various training programs in anti-human trafficking, cybercrimes, POXO, offenses against women, and has also actively assisted court for effective and purposeful administration of justice. I now request Ms. Payal Ghosh Banerjee to please share her experience. Yes, madam.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Honorable Justice Sen and the eminent speakers here. And thank you, Shaptashi, to invite me in this IJM from IJM on behalf of IJM to speak about my experiences as a lady prosecutor. As I'm a lady prosecutor, I've been serving my service from 2005. And in the day-to-day life, what I see that in my working daily life, I'm really traumatized. I deal with the traumatized persons, including the victims of prosecution, that they are having the torture, they are being sexually abused, and they give the traumatic narratives to me, which lingers to me, which I think about it when I go home and have to maintain both my official life as well as my family life. But the haunting, the hammering of the torture which has been inflicted upon them, it always affects my mental pressure. I would always ask the eminent speakers to see how to overcome all these disorders. And when I have to represent the state every day in my day-to-day police file, that is a remand file, I know that I am alone as a lady advocate in one side of my profession, and on the other side I have the legal professionals who may be many a number, and they are having a work-induced pressure, they are ambitious, they work late, maybe they have anxiety, stress to give relief to their clients. For that, what happens, they sometimes they become impatient, stubborn, and behave in an erratic behavior, and which makes me also irritated, and I also cannot control myself, and I also speak in that manner, which fully affects the decorum of the court. And I think that all these things which are maybe it is empathy deficit disorder, which is we are very much overlooking that, where there are variations of mood and temperament, and these are some of the disorders. and for which what happens, the other side is having personal conflicts and they are having a adversarial thing. But I know that I'm not blaming anybody, neither me nor them, but I think it is all about the mental stress, agony, which may be a milder form of disorders we are facing in this globalized world. And this today's interconnected globalized world, I think we should be very much careful, and we should help ourselves to overcome. And the lawyers, what Dr. Ram has aptly said, that they are having the vicarious trauma, speaking of for the client, and for the client, for the benefits of the client, they are speaking. And this happens what we have to face in the daily life. This is few of my experience which I am sharing with you during my police file, as well as dealing with the victims and of the prosecution, victims of prosecution, their sexual violence. All these things have led to, I think, this topic, which today's topic is there in this impact of the COVID also, it plays a very vital role. And the mental health is the serious and bona fide issue of the proper progress and development of our country. So we should all be very careful about it. And I think I want to put questions to the eminent speakers over here, so that how can we overcome as legal professionals, both for the prosecution and with the defense counsels, how can we overcome all these things in a very good manner so that all the decorum is maintained and we become all healthy. Wish you all for a better life, a better tomorrow, and the best of wishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Payal, for very candidly putting your experience and your observations in this particular profession, which we all know is full of many stresses, struggles, challenges, and all that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, upon conclusion of this webinar, we switch over to question and answer session. We have received so many questions, and I wish that we will try to club it as much as we can. And I don't think we'll be able to deal with all the questions. Still, however, well begin is half done. So I'm beginning with the first and foremost question to His Lordship, Justice Sen. In this pandemic, new advocates are suffering a lot, and they do not have their individual cases, because of which they are going through a lot of mental issues and challenges. So what can be done is one question, and connecting with that, there is another question that due to lockdown, most of the district and subdivision courts are closed, and therefore there is no mechanism of working on virtual courts, and that is creating disruptions. So what can be done to see to it that the career of junior is protected and he gets some advancement in his field? So I have tried to combine two questions to His Lordship. I hope His Lordship is online to reply.
You see that I think there is some amount of confusion which should not be there. Justice, the judiciary, in fact, is the third pillar of democracy. So there is no question of the courts being shut. Yes, we may not be working physically, but in case of necessity, all courts are approachable. If you go through the website of the High Court, you will find that we have laid down the procedure and the modules through which the courts can be approached. So it's not that we are shut down. Yes, for some time, even if we are shut down, urgent matters were being heard, subject to the urgency being satisfied, and then those matters are taken up. So that was for a brief period. Now again from last Friday, and now from Monday onwards, you will find in our website, and the notifications are already there, that how the courts will function. So far as the district courts are concerned, yes, every district has its own difficulty. You know that some districts, there are large containment zones. But notwithstanding such difficulties being faced by the judges there, they are always available for hearing the matters. Even physical filing was there. I think in North Bengal, the e-filing is there. We have not in the High Court yet. We started with e-filing, but then we switched over to physical filing because of certain reasons, but filings are there, cases are being filed, and the cases are taken up. Of course, for the time being, we are hearing the urgent matters. A lot of junior members are appearing before me, before various courts, not only in High Court, but also the districts. But certainly the number of cases have reduced in a sense that considering the infrastructure we have, we may not be able to say take X number of matters in a particular day. So urgent matters, if you have an urgent matter, those matters are taken up. In fact, there were discussions you must be aware of with the members of the bar by the COVID committee constituted by the Honorable the Chief Justice to find out the modalities, and we are fully aware and alive to these problems being faced by the advocates. You see, the physical appearance in courts has a lot of difficulties. The bar has to agree that they would maintain the social distancing and there should not be overcrowding. So they have to have some kind of discipline which they should follow not only for their benefits but for the smooth functioning of the judiciary. There is nothing to be traumatized. Yes, as I said in my keynote address, there is a phase, but in this phase, you will not be out of employment. If you have matters, you try to push it through, mention it before the appropriate courts. If you can show urgency, those matters should be taken up. We will try to do that because in the present situation, it may not be possible to take the other matters which are pending. But certainly, we are alive to this occasion, and soon we'll also, if the situation improves, then we'll certainly think of having these kind of matters being also heard. Your filing is not being stalled. You can go on filing. A large number of criminal matters are being heard. Even I've been informed by my district judges in the district courts that most of the times the lawyers have asked for adjournments. The judges are available. Yes, there is also a problem in the witness action. We may avail of the video conferencing facility. The video conferencing rules and the e-filing rules are almost finalized. So there is nothing to be demoralized. You should carry a hope that the situation will improve, and please try to enrich yourself in this time, get yourself prepared with the matters so that as soon as the courts are open, you are ready to argue and don't ask for adjournments.
Very much obliged, Your Lordship. The next question is to Professor Dr. Amita. The question is, can there not be counseling programs where the identity is kept anonymous in order to see to it that people freely come out with their mental health issues? What is your take, Dr. Amita? Are you online, Dr. Amita?
I'm online. I missed the last sentence that you said.
What is your take on that? The opinion is that can we keep the programs where the identity of the mentally ill person can be kept anonymous so as to see to it that people freely come out with their mental health issues?
Well, I am more inclined to sort of, because the anonymity in some manner, Jyotsna, once again reinforces that same stigma that this is something, you know, distinct, unique, which is happening to you. I would somewhere say more and more disclosure, more matter-of-fact way of talking about mental distress, creating everyday language for it, not see it as something unique and distinct. But the moment you speak in terms of anonymity and you speak in terms of that I should be able to do it, then it becomes like it is something to hide and something to be, you know, defensive about. That's how I would look at it.
Thank you. Now the next question is to Dr. Ram. How to let someone out of shame? That's a question to Dr. Ram. Dr. Ram, are you online?
I will, I think the previous question which you asked, Professor Dhanda, and this one are more or less related. I'm not sure why we should be, if I have a mental illness, then why should I be ashamed about it? I think that is absolutely clear that this can happen to anyone, and it is not a sign of weakness. I'm not sure whether the person who asked the question meant whether people who are suffering from mental illness, how they can get out of shame. But again, the same is applicable. We do deal with a lot of shame, guilt in sections which are marginalized, abuse, rape, assault, LGBT communities, where again it falls on us, the lawyers, the mental health professionals, to make them realize that whatever they are going through in their life's journey is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. And I also concur with Professor Danda's point that really, I think it reflects the point that people are hesitant to seek help because of this shame and guilt factor.
Thank you. Your Lordship, another question to Your Lordship. Losing of cases are creating mental pressure in this pandemic situation. How to deal with that?
You see, you will find many lawyers who have made a name and fame for themselves. Maybe their success rate is not as much as one would have claimed, but they are still successful in the sense because of their profound knowledge and maybe their ability to convince a judge on some points or the others. And even a person with a bad case would approach them most to see that if they could find out a silver lining to it. So losing a case is should be not to be taken personally. If you have done your best, I think the clients are also quite understandable. They understand this, that if you put your best efforts and even if you lose, it doesn't mean that as an advocate you had failed. You will find many good lawyers today, they may have their first cases they have lost, or maybe first 10 cases they have lost. It depends upon the quality of the matters. It depends upon the law already laid down in those cases. And what is most important is developing the art of advocacy, which can only come provided you are diligent and through your experience. So it is not a stigma. It may happen with any one of us. In fact, it has happened with many of us, that we may not have, say, we may have won, say if you have done 50 cases in a year, maybe 25 we have won, 25 we lost. So don't get upset with the fact that you have lost. Sometimes, yes, you may have a disappointment with the judge not being able to look into your point. But there the quality is how you can convince the judge. It is the, as I said, skill and art of advocacy. I have seen during my days at the bar that how a very weak case can be made an arguable case and make the judge think. He may have, on the first day of the motion, he may have said, I will dismiss your case. Then he go on hearing the matter for say 3 days. So this is the skill, and you will get confidence. When you develop this skill, when you are ready with this matter. So what is important for you is, as a junior advocate, my advice to you is, you read your brief, prepare yourself, no matter whether you win or lose, it's your personal satisfaction which comes at the end of the day.
Very much
a stigma. It's not a stigma.
Very much obliged, Your Lordship. The victory or the success is of the cause and not of individual. We should not take it so much to the heart.
Yes,
that's what
absolutely.
A very valuable piece of advice have been given by our Lordship. I'm very much obliged. The next question is to my dear friend, Dr. Amita. How to handle the all-day anxiety in regular profession? You are unmute. You are unmute. I mean, mute.
I said it is very interesting that a law person is being asked this question on how to handle anxiety. My thing somewhere would be that I think the doctor gave us a lot of tips on how you could be structuring your day. And primarily, I suppose it's a one, of course, I would say that some level of anxiety is integral to living. When you do work of any kind, you can't be saying that, oh, I can be doing this in this very Zen state. So to be anxious is okay. And I remember one psychiatrist friend of mine had long time ago said to me, okay, if I have to choose between anxiety and depression, I think I'd go for anxiety because it's somewhere more, makes me do things, whereas depression gets me to withdraw. But I think it's more in the lighter vein, so each of us have to just reckon with the fact that this business of having good days and bad days and having an up and down is a part of living. And no mental health profession and no spiritual, or other kinds of methods that we use to cope up with totally eliminates it. If we recognize it, that this is part of, that you will have these off times, then it's easier to cope with.
Thank you, Amita. Question is now to Dr. Ram. While choosing a career, it creates mental pressures for a student, which leads to mental illness. How to deal with this situation? Your take on it?
No, I think choosing a career hopefully should not, I say that in West Bengal, doctors are the most endangered species. So please don't choose medicine as a career, at least in West Bengal. But apart from that, I think your choosing a profession should not lead to mental health problems unless there are great pressures, on you to choose a career which you don't want to. And unfortunately, I do come across many, I know it's again a very cliched story, overbearing parents, but sadly, over the number of years I have been working, this fascination of parents pushing their children into careers which the parents prefer hasn't diminished. So I think we need to be very clear about that. Choices, I think we have to go through in a very carefully decisive manner. Personally, I find that before you take a big leap into some career path or some subspecialty of the career path. So suppose I'm talking about lawyers, whether you want to be a corporate lawyer, whether you want to be a kind of criminal lawyer or a tax lawyer, speaking to a senior, I think is very, very important so that you know the roadmap clearly in your mind. So I think knowledge about the course you are wanting to choose and how life would evolve in 10 to 15 years of time in the profession you want to dip your feet into protects us in some way. Finally, I must say that, life is like an Indian thali. You can't go without sadness, misery, pain, suffering, and just choose bits of dessert and only have happiness and success. And I feel failures teach us a lot more. There was a question about how do you deal with failures, which Justice Sen answered. I think failures, personally, for all vocational practitioners like us, failures teach us more. Successes we don't remember. So I think it's important to learn from failures so as to be a richer human beings.
I must thank Dr. that life is thali, and thereby reminding us that the time for the lunch is now started. And I think we must remember that that is also a very important activities of the day. So with this, the question answer session, though we have wonderful questions, full of live questions, the questions which are not only in form of suggestions, but there are certain genuine questions as well. But time is a constraint, and I don't think we'll be able to deal with or give justice to all the questioners. In light of this, I think it would be proper to conclude the session over here. But the last speech, that is vote of thanks, is by a very, very brilliant and very distinguished personality, Professor Ujjwal K. Chaudhary, Pro Vice Chancellor, of Adamas University, Dean Media, Communication and Fashion of Adamas University, a most well-known personality, not only of the media in the West Bengal, but at the national level. You will find every day him in YouTube. It's so difficult to secure his time. I'm thankful to him to have given his consent to express vote of thanks at the end of this lovely webinar. Every good beginning must have end, and the end gives charms of the entire session. So this webinar is also towards the closer. I now invite Professor Ujjwal K. Chaudhary to give vote of thanks. Professor Chaudhary, please.
Thank you, Dr. Yagnik. For the last 2.5 hours almost, I was in a classroom. A classroom which was a blend, a synergy between psychology, psychiatry, and law, both by practitioners and by academicians. A fabulous learning for me because I do not belong to either of these areas as far as regular practice is concerned. I am a student of communications. The common refrain, first of all, I must thank all the speakers, obviously, but that's just as a matter of courtesy, I don't want to do that. I want to highlight what learnings or lessons I take from them. The common refrain that I found among all the three major speakers and also those who have commented on them, the two commentators, the right to regulate one's life is taken away when law identifies one as mentally ill often. And therefore, it's a matter of care, caution, and compassion that this right or this identification or whatever, this has to be looked at with a lot of care, caution, and compassion. And another common point, mental health is not just analogous as physical health. It's much more complicated, much more significant. So identify sharing leads to stigma. Identity sharing leads to stigma. That has been one of the points that brought forth by many people. The other counterpoint is, why do you have to hide identity? Can't you make it a commonplace? Can't you make it a common, lingo, a matter of fact, and thereby normalize it? That's another point. A good point has been brought forth both in the observations and by the speakers that I found is that critical medical humanities is not in medical education. Many of the observers, many of the commentators were also noting this. And there is an attempt to reductionism or dehumanization that has to be explored even in medical education. That do you really handle this in a human manner? Now, overall, it seems that there is a critique of psychiatry that has been brought forth, the way Western philosophy, Western concepts have dealt with it. The Western world of psychiatry has dealt it from a very individualistic point of view and has looked at it that mind is a function of the brain. But the discussion has brought forth that many or most mental disorders don't have necessarily concrete fixed biological basis. So there are sociological and anthropological perspectives. In fact, there is a multi-perspectivism as a concept. This is very different from the Western concept, mind is a function of brain, or sort of. A fair society is needed to fight mental illness. Very well said by Dr. Dhanda. Mental health issues can be physical, biological, as much as a social structure questions. That also has been brought forth very well on the same spirit by Dr. Jairam. I really like this black swan event concept that has been brought forth. Then vicarious trauma, there Dr. Jairam did not have enough time to get into that, but peer supervision is critical for to handle or fight vicarious trauma of people who are handling trauma cases themselves. So they're getting under mental disorder or mental stress at least. Peer supervision is very critical, is a point that we need to really take home. Mirror image of the system failures that he has pointed out has to be also understood in that spirit. very rightly said, social capital that we build, social network and bonding that we build all across our lives are very useful towards the end. And in these times of challenging moments of pandemic, building social capital stronger is a necessity. Very well said indeed. Quest of happiness, positivity, joy, and sharing the same, the spirit of Justice Sen's talk. I really hail that how, in spite of all the challenges to humanity, unforeseen in the last 1 century, how quest of happiness, positivity, joy can be the focus point. And very well said, there's another point that has been brought forth towards the end, need to fight infodemic and need to fight doom scrolling. In a seeking and consuming negative news throughout the day, I must confess that I was looking at the figures of illness and death more than the figures of cure for a very long time during the starting of this pandemic, March, April, maybe May. June onwards, I course corrected. Whenever I went, first of all, instead of 20 times a day, I looked at the figures only one time before, usually in the evening, one time, and I was looking more at the progress in the vaccines and research on vaccines and the cure and care and the flattening of the curves in those countries where it started first. So looking at the positive side of a negative thing is a serious way of fighting doom scrolling. And infodemic is a bigger thing. It is a part of my domain, information pandemic, or what you call as fake news and I call as false content, because if it is news, it cannot be fake, and if it is fake, it cannot be news. So we need to look at that in a big way. I must tell that there is a possibility that disciplines of law, psychiatry, and communication can come together and organize later on, and IJM can take a lead in that, in creating a webinar or a content which is critically looking at false content. What are the sources of false content? There are 15 to 20 sources, false content or fake news as people say. And how can that be identified easily by a common man? There are 13-14 tips by which, the way Dr. Jairam has really very effectively given tips to keep your mental health stronger. There are tips that the common man can take without resorting to any technology to identify false content and free himself or herself of it. And then there are technology driven, like reverse imaging and all, technology driven ways of handling it. Maybe we can actually look at that. And in conclusion, I repeat what Dr. Jairam has said, stay in the moment undoubtedly is the necessity of the time. And strongly, unambiguously, I want to once again emphasize, social distancing is a flawed concept. It is physical distancing and social solidarity, and that will keep the mental health stronger. Physical distancing for the moment due to pandemic, but surely, certainly, unambiguously, social closeness, social intimacy, social bonding. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We had enjoyed this entire webinar and look forward to see you all again. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye-bye.